So, Friday before last, October 7th, a suicide bombing occurred on the Kerch Bridge. Three people were killed. The bridge suffered major damage. Ukraine special forces claimed responsibility and were praised by its illegitimate coup government and by Russia hawks in the American government. The bridge is the only pathway connecting Russia to the Crimea, a peninsula on the Black Sea bordered by Ukraine to the north and Russia to the east, and thus is a strategic target of the Russian hawks. So the motives are clearly on the side of the Western imperialists. One day before the attack, US President Joe Biden remarked that we now face the prospect of nuclear Armageddon more than any time since the Cuban Missile Crisis. The attack on the Kerch Bridge could signal the intent of Ukraine, and by extension its Western allies, to invade Crimea, an escalation that increases the odds of a nuclear response. While the US claims it does not encourage Ukraine to launch attacks into Russia's borders, the endless supply of long-range weaponry gifted to Ukraine tells a very different story, as does the categorical denial of negotiations of a ceasefire. This despite Russia's eminently reasonable terms: water to the Crimea, and to restore Minsk II, the peace treaty that ended hostilities between Kiev and ethnic Russians in the Donbass region. In the name of defending Ukrainians, the imperialists will force Ukraine to continue fighting this war to the last Ukrainian, replicating the horrific genocidal atrocity of the Korean War in the 1950s. Despite this very credible risk, the Western imperialists are hell-bent on poking the bear that is Russia. Their provocations already brought us to the crisis we see now. Despite very clear warnings from Putin, the NATO powers insisted on dumping long-range weaponry into Ukraine, thus crossing a known red line of the Russian president. These ill-advised war games of the imperialists, leading to the prospect of nuclear war, all stem back to the Biden crime family's corrupt dealings with Ukraine. Private profits for defense industry capitalists, finance capital's need to protect U.S. oil and gas monopolies from competition with Russian state-owned companies. State-owned companies that helped Russia recover from capitalist plunder after the USSR was forcibly dissolved, and the degrowth agenda of Big Green, which will solve the climate crisis by forcing the costs onto everyday people. The imperialists want regime change in Russia, no doubt wishing for the return of Yeltsin or Gorbachev, who were happy to sell their people down the river to please the West, much unlike Putin, who has put his people's interests first, to the chagrin of banking oligarchs and Western monopoly capital. Albert Einstein once famously said that if there is ever a World War III, he wouldn't know what weapons are used to fight it, but that the weapons used in World War IV will be sticks and stones. We know Einstein is one of the most brilliant minds of human history, the famed physicist. It must also be said that he was an avowed socialist who spoke glowingly of the Soviet Union, in a historical period when socialists were at the vanguard of a robust anti-war movement. This quote was the plea not of an idealist for pacifism, it was a warning of a wise people's champion against the danger of imperialism, the monopoly stage of capitalism. Working people have nothing to gain from this conflict and have paid a heavy personal price with backbreaking inflation and economic recession, even if the US denies that recession. It is time we demand the end of the war and indeed for detente, restoring peaceful relations with Russia. We should be joining the efforts of Russia to rid Syria of ISIS, not joining the efforts of nations that fund terrorism against America. We should engage in win-win trade to grow our economy while restoring our crumbling infrastructure. These are the perks of ending our senseless anti-Russia policy, and at this point, it is not alarmist to say that our lives and human civilization may depend on it.